So an official welcome to How to Take a Gap Year, the ultimate crash course where you'll find the top tricks and resources for your ultimate gap year experience. We're really excited again to have you. I sound like a broken record, but this is the highlight of my day when I get to be able to interact with all of you. So thank you so much for tuning in. So before we dive into the meat of the evening, I just want to put forth a few quick resources that I definitely would encourage you all to check out. And even before I start to describe these resources, I do just want to give you a heads up that I'm going to be kind of referencing a lot of different links and websites tonight. Don't worry about writing all of those down. I'll be dropping them into the chat later. And then I'll also be able to send an email out to you tomorrow with all these resources as well. So you'll have them there too. So don't worry about any frantic scribbling or anything like that. So the first thing that I definitely want to bring to mind and bring call to attention is our USA Gap Year Fairs. If you haven't joined a fair already, I would really strongly encourage you to do that. It is an awesome opportunity to make connections with a slew of great gap year program providers, as well as gap year counselors. Really connect one-on-one with them and get all your questions answered. And as of today, we just finalized 4 in-person fairs as well. So if you're in the area of Scarsdale, Hanover, Fairfield, or, oh my gosh, now it's slipping my mind, Boulder, definitely come join us at one of those events. And I'll for sure drop a link to register into the chat later on. Next, I want to call to attention our Gap Year Hub, which is a 24/7 resource where you'll be able to find a ton of different gap year resources. Gosh, sound like a broken record again. Ton of different gap year articles and programs, scholarship information. We have a $5,000 gap year scholarship launching on March 1st, which I really encourage you all to apply for. So keep your eyes peeled on that website, which I'll be dropping a link to later on. And then finally, this is my favorite resource of all, dare I say, the Gap Matcher Quiz. So this is on Go Overseas, and it's a fantastic way to narrow down sort of a customized list of programs if you are looking for a place to start. So it's a quick quiz. You'll be able to put in your interests and your gap year goals. And then after you finish, you'll be matched with a variety of different programs that could be a good fit for you. So it's a really great place to begin your gap year journey. Okay, and then just a reminder that this crash course isn't a one and done thing. We actually have 7, I believe in total, yes, crash courses. So if you haven't joined us already, you still have the opportunity to really connect with us later on, all the way through March 10th. And then all of these are also going to be recorded and then posted as well on our USA Gap Year Fairs YouTube channel, so you can look back on them and watch the ones that you might have missed. And then finally, a quick plug for our post-event survey. So here at USA Gap Year Fairs, we're always eager to do better. More than anything, I personally want to hear from you. I want to know how I can make these crash courses better for you moving forward. So please, please, please fill out that survey that we'll be sending to you via email. And I'll also be dropping it into the chat later on. And I would love to hear your voice and your thoughts and your feedback for what we can do better and what went well. So thank you in advance for filling out that survey. And I almost forgot to say the most important thing about this survey is that if you fill it out within 24 hours of this event, you'll be automatically entered into a chance to win $250. And it's really that simple. Just fill out the survey within 24 hours of this event and you'll be automatically entered in there. Okay, and it looks like I have some of my notifications going off. So that is a great reminder for me to put on my do not disturb. I'm so sorry for that. Okay, so again, this is the Gap Year. Oh, goodness gracious, we're going crazy on these slides. This is the Gap Year Alumni AMA, or Ask Me Anything, where we have 2 phenomenal Gap Year alumni joining us today, Drew and Nicole. I won't spend a whole lot of time introducing them because you'll be able to hear from them shortly. But I do just want to say, again, thank you for joining us. What you can expect tonight, we just went through those intro slides. So now the rest is really a quick introductions from our panelists. And then the rest of the time will be Q&A. So again, pop those questions as you think of them into the Q&A box. This is really your chance to kind of ask any kind of burning gap year inquiries or curiosities today. So quickly about me, I am actually not a Gap Year alumni, but I will be here, obviously, helping to facilitate this conversation. I am the Outreach and Events Coordinator for USA Gap Year Fairs, and I've worked on various Gap Year programs. So most recently, I was working in Costa Rica with Gap Year students through Virtual Education. And then prior to that, I've also taught abroad with Fulbright. I've advised international TEFL trainees. So I have a lot of experience working abroad and navigating those spaces. And it's something that I'm really passionate about. And that is enough. You guys are probably sick of hearing my voice. Woo, just have one voice, hopefully. So I'm going to finally pass it along to one of our amazing panelists. Drew, I will let you take it away.
I'm going to steal your thunder, Drew, and I'm going to go first.
I'll let you take it away.
No worries. Thanks, Claire. My name's Nicole Darr. I'm 22. I'm currently in New Mexico, like I said, but I'm a senior at UT Austin, which is my hometown. I took a gap year in 2018. And when I was planning for everything, I didn't know a lot of people who took a gap year. So I really like talking about it and advocating for that time because it impacted my life a lot. The first half of my gap year, I took a program. So I went on a 3-month trip to Southeast Asia with a program called ARCC. And I met 12 amazing people, had 2 great program leaders, and it was really nice having a structured period of time to kind of dip my foot in the water and get acquainted with traveling abroad and sort of this newfound independence after high school. So I really wanted a structured program first. And then after doing that, the rest was really unplanned. And those people shaped what I did for the second half of my gap year and really helped me along the way. So for the second half, I went to Ghana, a really small town in Ghana, for 6 weeks, and I taught English there. And after that, bounced around independently in Europe and Australia. So it's a little bit about me. I'll pass it on to Drew now, and then hopefully can answer your questions later.
Wow, all that sounds like a lot of fun. You're really piquing my wanderlust at the moment, Nicole. Hey, what's up, guys? My name is Drew. I am finishing up my senior year at DePaul University over in Chicago. I'm a gap year alumni. I am a summer program trip leader. I am a study abroad alum. So basically, if it has anything to do with travel and education combined, I've been there and I can answer any sort of questions about that. Now, for me, my time with gap years did not start after I graduated high school. No one at my high school did or even talked about a gap year. And there was a very brief window during my junior or senior year of high school where I thought about maybe I'll take some time off, travel before college. And then I completely forgot about that thought and ended up going to a music conservatory. Fast forward a couple months down the road, I was swamped in music assignments, all sorts of homework. And I just really wasn't having it in the university life. And I decided that I wanted to take that time for me, take the time to really think about what's next and really critically assess where I wanted to go in life. So I made the decision to not return back to my university after just 1 semester. I joined the same program that Nicole did, ARC programs, except I went off to the Pacific Islands. So I spent 3 months in Indonesia and Fiji, which was a total blast. It was an opportunity for me to really rethink my direction, where I was going, where I was coming from, and sort of how I wanted to shape experiential education. With that concluding, I took this idea of experiential travel and education through doing, and I ran with that. I ended up transferring back to my university where I am now. I switched majors, I added on a minor. I basically did everything that I could to switch up my college path after my gap year. Moving forward, I basically used my gap year to advance my career in academics in every step of the way. I found a job at my university that I got because of my gap year, because of talking about experiences that I had. I started working with various gap year program providers, and I got hired to lead trips, which has been a ton of fun with the same company that I did my gap year on. So there's a whole lot of room. And if there's one takeaway that you're listening to that I would love to send you home with, it's that your travel, your experience, whatever you choose to do in your gap year does not have to stop as soon as that next chapter of your life, whether that be college or beyond, begins. So, I mean, that's something that I really take into heart. Like I said, I've had job, academic, professional, all sorts of other travel experiences that have all stemmed from that time on my gap year. So with that being said, that's my story in a nutshell. I'd love to dive into it a little bit more if you guys have questions. Claire, you wanna finish this off?
I sure do. Thank you both, Drew and Nicole. Wow, you guys should be the ones running this webinar, please. You are so amazing. You guys have so much to offer, so I'm really excited for the remainder of this session. And I see that we already have a question coming in, which is fantastic. So I am just going to go ahead and stop sharing our screen so that you can see our faces as we answer you. And let's dive into those questions. So again, please do keep them coming. You can pop them into the chat. You can pop them into the Q&A. But this question I'm going to bring to both Drew and to Nicole. And the question is, what was your process to choose a program? What was that like?
I can go ahead and start this one off. For me, as I mentioned, I decided to do a gap year very last second. I wasn't thinking about it into high school. So I had about 3 weeks to pick a program before I actually left the country and started my gap. And that was a very, very stressful experience because the truth is there are so many fantastic programs. And I do think that sort of doing that work to sort of figure out what you want for yourself, that sort of self-reflection, is an important part of the process because all of these programs, they do offer slightly different iterations. They are all different. There are a lot of travel programs. You can be going to the same country, the same destination, the same state with multiple programs. But just because you're going to the same place, who you go with and the focus of that is going to be so completely different based on who you go with. So I think that first step is really about sort of thinking, what do you want to get out of it? And if you don't know, that's totally okay. So back to my story, I didn't really know where I was going to end up with only 3 weeks, but that time crunch really allowed me to deep dive into all of the different programs available and just sort of talking with different advisors from different programs, considering where I wanted to go, what I wanted to get out of it, and where I saw myself after my gap year. That sort of helped me to sort of think about what that perfect program would look like for me.
I think that's all great. And bouncing off of what you said, Drew, I think that I had a really different experience because I wanted to take a gap year since the 8th grade, and you're like, why in the world would you know as an 8th grader that you wanted to do this? And I didn't know anyone who had done it until this girl came into my English class one day and started talking about her time during our class to our English teacher, and it was like the most eye-opening, epic conversation I've ever had. I like didn't know it was an option, and then kind of did a deep dive into it throughout all 4 years of high school and tried to absorb so much information, which can also be as overwhelming as deciding in 3 weeks because there's a lot of programs to choose from. I think a big part of why I chose the program I did was the level of support that was given. So each program you can look at would give you different amounts of support. Some might be more independent, some might be much stricter. I know some programs where they don't allow you to have your own cell phone, and some people like enjoy that experience. And like I have heard such good things about that program. So it really just, I think an important part is understanding how much support you want. Do you want someone to plan out your 3 months or 6 months or a couple weeks? Bringing in the length of the program is also important. You got to think about how much time you want to be away from home, what you're comfortable with, finding a right amount of time to get out of your own comfort zone. So I think that group size, your length of your program, and understanding what level of support is given were like the 3 main factors for me.
Such great points. Thank you both, Drew and Nicole. I have a follow-up question to that, actually. I'm curious to know, is it possible to kind of, in your opinion, is it possible to speak with program alumni to kind of hear about their experience before you really decide on a program? Is that something that's a common thing? Is that something that you recommend asking about? And if so, what are some questions that you would ask a program alumni to try to get them, the most information possible about what you're signing up for?
Yeah, thanks, Claire. That's a really good follow-up question. I've definitely spoken with a couple of prospective gap students who are doing a similar program to the one that I did, who have reached out to me as casually as just over Instagram or Facebook. But I've also been put in touch with a couple prospective gappers from my program. So it is definitely a good idea to sort of know what you're signing up for. Because I mean, sometimes when you are doing your research, when you're talking to people or looking on a website at beautiful pictures from around the world, it can seem just sort of like a dream vacation, but that's not always exactly what it is or what it exactly should be. So I do think that having that opportunity and sort of asking like, what was hard about it? What is challenging? What do you wish you knew before is sort of a good way to sort of, I don't know, I guess sort of level your standards.
I think that's a super good point. I think that it's when you get all of these magazines, they're really like glorified and you don't get to the real experience. Obviously, you're going to have to go through that yourself, but it's really great to ask questions to alumni. And you can reach out if you know of someone, just feel free to reach out to them. I guarantee you, everyone who's taken a gap year loves talking about it. They can blab on about it forever. But you can also reach out to the program directly and they can put you in contact with people. I did that with a lot of prospective programs and everybody was really nice about it, and actually got to talk to a couple of leaders. So if you want to know like what your program leader will bring into it and how that will help you, you can also potentially talk to them, which is a really cool experience to get to do before going on the trip.
So cool. Nicole and Drew, those are great tips. Thank you for bringing those forth. And Heather, I will get to your second question later. I just want to pop into Abby's right now in the Q&A box. She asked a really phenomenal question as well, which is how and how much did you budget for your gap year? Really important. Let's talk about that.
So a lot of budgeting for mine came with sort of understanding how I was going to pay for college. I was very fortunate in the sense that I was able to use a savings plan that was intended for my college to help pay for the cost of my gap year. And part of the reason why I was able to do that is because I had a conversation with my parents one night that was essentially along the lines of, if we have this money set aside for my college and for my higher education, then one of the best things that I could do with it is use those funds to help me take a gap year where I can really reflect and use this money for college in the best possible way instead of jumping from major to major. So I was very fortunate to be able to use a lot of sort of my college savings to redirect towards my gap year. Now, gap years really can be as expensive or as cheap as you want them to be. There really is no one size fits all formula. I did end up working quite a bit when I returned from my gap semester, just sort of pay off at the very least some of the own spending that I had done beyond the program costs of my gap semester. And I also found other ways to sort of make the most out of that college fund that I had used. For instance, I took online classes during my gap semester so that I was able to use those college saving funds. And I also took summer classes moving forward. And I've done that every semester since I took my gap year so that I could graduate a semester early, which means one less semester that I was paying for college, thus would be used for my gap year. So just sort of thinking ahead and using planning and just sort of financial literacy tactics is a really great way to just sort of get ahead with that.
That's great. I think that me and Drew might have a similar experience because we took the same program. So if you've looked into gap programs at all, you know that the range isn't very big. Like it's usually a large cost to go on a gap program, and that's just something you know up front. And I knew I wanted to take a program because I wanted that structured time and I wanted that support from people who had already led trips. So I started working when I was 16. I had a side job when I was going to high school and slowly saved up as much as I could to pay towards that half of it. And because I left my second half pretty open-ended, I focused on funding that first half of my gap year and kind of hoped everything else would fall into place, because you can always go back to your hometown and pick up a job if you wanted to. You can go abroad and get a job. There are work visas. Like I know people that I've met on that I met on my gap year that made money. They didn't spend any money on their gap year and they actually made money that went towards their college. So definitely what Drew said, like you can make it as expensive or as inexpensive as you want. You can even make money on your gap year. So definitely flexible. If you're looking to do a program though, I do recommend picking up a side job, looking at scholarships that Claire will provide for you. I'm sure there's a bunch of resources that she has for you about scholarships. And I know applying for scholarships can be scary because it's like, oh, a bunch of people are probably applying for these and I'm not going to get any money and I don't want to waste my time. But if you think about it, if you spend an hour on one scholarship application, on the off chance you'll get it, you just made $5,000 for that 1 hour of work you put in. So I really recommend applying for scholarships because a lot of people have the same mindset about it and less people apply than you think. So definitely use those resources.
That's huge. Thank you guys so much. And yes, I will definitely drop some links into the chat about scholarships. The one that I will definitely, I gotta stop saying definitely, but the one that I want you guys to check out come March 1st, USA Gap Year Fairs is launching a $5,000 gap year scholarship. So keep your eyes peeled for that. And then I also just dropped into the chat as well a link to our recording from our last crash course, which was so informative, and it was on gap year scholarships and funding specifically. I personally learned so much. I learned so much, and I've already been to so many crash courses and gap year fairs, so it was all really new and great information about different programs you can seek out, tips for planning a budget, tips for finding scholarships. And it was hosted by the phenomenal gap year consultants and gap year experts, Jane and Jason Soroyan of J2 Guides. So if you didn't attend that session and you're interested in learning more about gap year funding, I would really advise you to check out that recording on YouTube. You can fast forward through my intro slides and it'll just be a quick Q&A. So check that out for sure. Okay, and then let's get to this question from Heather, and it ties into Sue's a little bit. So the question is, do you think it's valuable to leave the second half of the gap year more open-ended? And then I'm going to also just throw you Sue's question as well, because I do think it ties in well, which is, if there's a preference, is it better to plan the whole year at once or plan the big program first and take the rest of the year based on your experience from there?
I can jump on this one first. I think those are really good questions and definitely something that I think everybody thinks about, whether they're going to take a whole year or just a semester. It's just stressful planning what to do first. And I think that how I did it, at least, was I took my program semester first because I wanted that structure first. I didn't want to be thrown into the deep end by myself in international travel because it's not something I had done before. So I definitely think that if you're worried at all about your gap year or you want that support, I recommend doing a program on the first end of your year. As for leaving it open-ended or not, I know people that did it both ways, and I think that's something you learn during your gap year, or a lot of people learn eventually in life, is that plans change pretty quickly, and your attitude about how those plans change and being flexible with that is gonna make or break your experience, really. So if you plan everything out in your life for an entire year, regardless of if you're taking a gap year or you're just going to college, something's not going to go the way you want it to, or something's going to make your plans change along the way. I think a lot of gappers who had this experience was during 2019, 2020 because of COVID. So I definitely think I would prefer an open-ended second semester, just because you learn so much in the structured program about like things you like doing, things you want to focus on, passions you want to explore, different places you want to go. You might fall in love with a country you're already in and want to stay there. Like, I think that the more open you are to other perspectives and hearing what other people are doing as well, I think you're going to hear about some pretty cool experiences that you wouldn't have heard before when you're just planning by yourself in a room in your hometown. So I think keeping your options open is definitely helpful in the long run. Again, I understand if you're like very type A and want to plan everything out, it might be much less stressful to just plan it all out at once. But my biggest advice is just to be open to change.
That's a very important piece, to be open to change. It's definitely something that I emphasize on my own travel. But in terms of planning one half of a gap year versus the whole thing at once, as I planned all of my gap time very spontaneously, and I only really did one thing for my gap semester. I think, hypothetically speaking, if I were to do a full gap year, I definitely would have wanted to sort of hop into a group travel program and then go from there. Because I mean, I could tell how much I had changed just in the 3 months that I was traveling with a group. Um, I knew a lot more about like travel logistics, group facilitating, planning when I came out of it. And I was actually able to put sort of what I learned to the test after my gap year. One of the biggest takeaways from my gap time is that it really inspired me to do a whole lot of independent travel. My school system is built on quarters, which means that I'm done for the year at Thanksgiving break. So the last 3 years, I've used the last like 6 weeks of the year to just sort of independently travel, which has been such a blessing because I've been able to take all of these skills that I learned from this group travel and apply it towards my own travel through lots of trial and error. So that's been sort of, I guess, the second half of my gap year, if you will, and sort of having that freedom, that flexibility to step away from a program and sort of do what you want to, and sort of continue the adventure is a lot of fun. And I think having that open-ended is a really important part of the process. For instance, when I was on my gap year, I got asked to stick around in Bali and hop onto an internship, and I wasn't able to do that. And that was very sad to say no to. So keeping your options open and just sort of being flexible with things is very much, you will thank yourself for it in the future.
That's so great. Amazing points again from both of you. And I think that Nicole, I think that you bring up a really good point of, even if you do plan your full year and you don't go through with that full year, it's still a great exercise. You're still thinking about your goals. You're still creating a budget. You're still creating a timeline, and those things will be applicable no matter what you do, even if you have to pivot your plans. And then Drew, I completely resonate with you in terms of plan A is rarely going to be it. It's often plan B, it's often plan C, because you're constantly changing yourself. So when I worked with my cohort of 40 some students in Costa Rica, a lot of them came into the semester with plans to pursue another gap year program or to pursue college right after that semester in Costa Rica. I would say at least 50% ended up changing those plans and doing another semester with our organization in a different location, or choosing to kind of do a WOOF program where they're able to earn money and kind of do a more independent gap year. So a really interesting question, and thank you both for your insight there. Okay, I love this question so much from anonymous attendee because I think it's relevant to everybody right now, regardless of whether or not you're a student or if you're planning gap time. And it is, do you have any tips on planning a gap year when you are burnt out?
Do I ever? I think that using your burnout to inspire you to take a gap year, like that's like the essence of what travel and what gap time is all about, really. I mean, I was very burnt out after going to college to pursue something that I thought for so long was what I was going to do for the rest of my life. And using that burnout really inspired me to just go away as far as I could, do things that I never thought I would do, eat things that I never imagined I would try. I mean, just today at work, I was feeling burnt out. And I mean, I feel like sometimes the perfect solution to burnout is just like looking at pictures of like faraway beaches or mountains you want to climb and just sort of getting after that. I think that burnout is a serious, thing to not take lightly as you are finishing up high school or wherever you are in your path in life. And sort of listening to that and asking yourself sort of, what is it about what is happening in a classroom or wherever I am that isn't resonating, and sort of continuing that conversation with yourself, like, what would make me excited? What would I want to learn about if it wasn't for a grade, if it wasn't for parameters? If I could do anything, what would that look like? and sort of going from there and expanding your mind map and just sort of figuring out like, what would I be so excited to do, and how do I make that happen for a couple months, for half a year, for a whole year? And I think that's a really great way to start with that. And I think if you go ahead and do that, you will be shocked about sort of how you feel about burnout at the end of your year going into college or whatever's next.
I think those are really great questions to ask yourself. And definitely, I think a gap year can be something to look forward to and almost like make your burnout go away and your senioritis go away because you're so excited for the next thing. But I also want to touch on how it can be difficult when you're experiencing burnout to even like get up and plan something, because planning a gap year takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of research. And if you're burnt out in general from school, I have two siblings that are both in high school, and I know like I talk to them about gap years and they're like, Nicole, I don't want to hear it. I'm just tired and I want to go to sleep and I have too much to do and too much to think about. So I know that it can be really difficult to plan your gap year when you're already feeling that burnout from school. I think that getting in touch with a gap year provider or a counselor that isn't at your school is also really helpful. It's kind of like having a mentor or a coach just to walk you through the process and have someone like ping your ideas back and forth with, or just have a support system that is outside of your parents or your friends or your school counselor. And I think that is really helpful, just to relieve a little pressure from you too. So if that's something that you're interested in, I definitely check out those people. Claire mentioned J2 guides. They do a lot of stuff. Julia Rogers does a lot of gap year counseling, and I know they know so much stuff and they are very helpful. So if you're experiencing burnout, I recommend talking to them if you're having trouble getting started planning your gap year. And also, just while we're talking about burnout, I think that gap years are very glorified, as I mentioned before, but you can also experience burnout on a gap year. Like traveling is very, very fun, but you can also overdo yourself on a gap year. And I think that it's very important to just take time to rest, especially since most people are go, go, go in high school. You don't have to do that on your year off. Like you can take time for yourself. If you are someone who really likes the holidays and you want to be home for Christmas, like don't force yourself to be away during a time where you want to be at home. Like you can just take 2 weeks and do nothing and be okay with that. Like give yourself that time. And I think it's really important. And it's a good way to like regain energy before your next step or going to college after your year off.
I was muted. I love that. Thank you both so much for that. That was a really great perspective on burnout. And thank you to anonymous attendee for bringing forth that excellent question. I'm going to jump into Tim's question really quick. I can answer that a bit myself. And Nicole and Drew, if you have anything that you'd like to add, feel free to jump in there as well. So Tim asks, here's a real parent's question. For a gap year student eventually intending to go to college, is it best to have applied to colleges in advance and have that all settled? Or do gap year students tend to those issues while away? What's the most common approach for that transition to post-gap? And we actually have some questions too on the transition to post-gap, so we can speak more on that too. Tim, what I'll say from what I've heard from our past crash courses is that it's really best to apply to college in advance. And then most colleges do have some kind of deferral process. And that's a whole lot easier than applying to colleges while you're on your gap year. That was a really straightforward, simple answer for you. I'll also encourage you to check out our February 15th crash course, which is actually with Julia, who Nicole just mentioned, one of our expert gap year consultants. She's amazing. And the topic of that crash course is going to be Gap Year Parents and Educators AMA. So you'll be able to ask her anything about that process for applying to colleges and deferrals, all that good, juicy stuff. But Nicole and Drew, if you have anything else to add onto that, feel free to jump in.
No, that's really well put, Claire. I do think that sort of the best sort of course of action is to apply beforehand. A lot of colleges, especially nowadays, are very, very eager to give deferrals. A lot of colleges are big fans of gap years, and they will be more than happy to oblige. There are some colleges where it even makes sense to include the fact that you're planning on taking a gap year in your application. when I was transferring universities, I definitely made light of the fact that I was taking a gap year. And I do think that it helped sort of boost my application. But overall, sort of applying, sort of getting all of that squared away before your gap time begins is typically the way to go, in my opinion.
I think that definitely that's the way to go, and you should apply beforehand, just like almost to have the support of your counselors, your recommendations from your teachers while they know you really well. And doing it at the same time as your friends is also really helpful, just so you have that support team. But I just want to share my experience too. I did that and I applied at the same time that my friends did. And so my senior year of high school, I was applying and I had gotten into a couple of schools, but I didn't get into the school that I wanted to. So I ended up not deferring anywhere, which is totally okay. And I know a lot of people that did it and then reapplying during your gap time, which is definitely a harder route because you want to be like in the mindset of your gap time and you don't want to think about applying to schools or college or courses, any of that stuff. But I applied while I was on my ARC program and I had that group of 11 as my support team, and they were really helpful in the process. And I ended up getting the school that I wanted to go to, which is the school I'm at now, UT Austin. And I know that a lot of schools in the South aren't doing deferrals yet. So if like you have a dream school and they're not doing deferrals, don't knock the gap year out of your head and don't knock that school out of your head. Just know that there's other pathways for you to do what you want to do on your gap year and then come back and reapply. But yeah, I definitely recommend applying with all your friends and as ahead of time as you can.
So nice. So much wisdom coming right now from you guys. Thank you. Those were really great answers. Okay, let's jump to Abby's question because it ties in so well with college and gap years. So Abby wants to know, what was your experience like going back to college after your gap year? Was it hard to get back into the swing of academics? And I'll also just add on too, not just the swing of academics, but the swing of being in a community that might not have had the same experience that you did.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that one. I will admit that starting at a new school, starting in a new major, starting in a new city, that was it was challenging for me at first when I did return to college. I felt like in a lot of sense, I had this like great lived real world experience that not a lot of my peers really shared. But I mean, the great thing about college is that it sort of is about finding different worldly experiences and it is about broadening horizons. So I feel like a lot of the time, even if you're not surrounded by people who have been through the same life-changing program or even know what it's like to take a year away from academics ever, there's a lot of really great support to bounce that off people, meet people who are sort of interested in the same interest that you may have found on your gap time. Furthermore, there are a lot of really great opportunities in college to continue studying through experiential learning. I was lucky enough to study abroad over the last semester, and that was a really fantastic way to sort of reignite some of the passion that I had for learning through doing.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd love to touch on it as well. I think that if you're traveling abroad specifically on your gap time, there's some amount of culture shock regardless of what you do next when you come back to the US. And it's definitely something that is talked about in ARC programs with your leaders at the end of your trip, and it's something that's talked about in many programs. It's just, I think you learn a lot of things on your gap time, and especially just your adaptability goes up and you're more open to being uncomfortable in situations that you're in. So transitioning to college, whether you're going straight from high school or you're going from high school to a gap year to college, is uncomfortable. Like most of the time you're not going to know anyone. It could be in a new city, new state. And it's nerve-wracking. And I think that you just have to give yourself that adjustment period regardless, and give yourself time to really find what clubs you like, what courses you like, and the people that you want to surround yourself with will come. There's so many different people you can meet, and you just have to put yourself out there just like in a gap year. So I think that it's definitely, college is exactly what a gap year is. It's like how much you put into it is how much you're going to get back. So I think that although it might be hard to find people with similar experiences as you, being open to hearing what other people's experiences are will lead you to finding your group of people in college.
Wow, couldn't have put it better myself. Thank you guys. Okay, let's move on now to Sue's first question, which was, oh, gapping in the time of COVID. So, what are your perspectives on a gap year at the tail end of a pandemic? Fingers crossed, tail end. Pros, cons, tips, tricks. What have you got?
So in addition to being a GAP alum, I also lead trips with the same organization that I was a student with. So this past summer, I had a cohort of students who I was leading domestically out in Yellowstone and Tetons. And I was really curious to see sort of how my students would sort of react to being in a new group, potentially for the first time in a year and a half or 2 years. And I mean, right from the bat, getting out of, getting away from your high school, getting away from the same people who you've seen for the last 2 years, getting that chance to travel and see new things is a really cathartic moment for a lot of people. And I think that it's a really interesting time to take a gap year, because if there's one thing that the pandemic has really done to the gap field, it's diversified what you can do. The preconceived notion about a gap year, and we've touched on this a little bit, is that it has to be an expensive round the world trip. And that's not true. And it's especially not true right now. I know so many GAP alumni who have had fantastic internships domestically, even in their hometowns. I have a friend who did a gap year and worked on a political campaign, and really sort of reinvented what you can do in a year away from high school and college. And there's like so many opportunities like that to just sort of try new things and sort of expand what you can do in a year, I think. And going back to my students who I was sort of leading with this summer, I think that they had a lot more of an impactful time than they may have had otherwise if they were traveling in a non-pandemic time, because they all had this shared experience of living through a pandemic, of sort of knowing what it's like to be isolated and sort of not being able to meet new people. So it really helped to that group dynamic. And I think it really gave them a lot more meaningful and unique experience at the perfect time for them to receive it.
I think Drew has more insight into this because he's led gap trips, especially during COVID. I took mine in 2018, so COVID was not affecting my gap time in that year. But I think that, like Drew said, a lot of new domestic opportunities have popped up, and a lot of people have taken that and run with it. And I think that's great because you don't have to travel internationally. I think the con of that is that if you wanted to travel internationally, you can't bounce around as much as you may have wanted to. But I think that if I were to do one thing different during my gap year, it would be staying in a place for longer. So I think COVID actually gives you the opportunity to pick a place and stay there for longer, integrate yourself in a community, find an internship, learn a new language. I think there's a lot of pros to staying somewhere for a long period of time. So although it might be a bummer that you can't bounce around as much as you might want to, it might be exactly what you need.
Yes, 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 yes. Wow, I'm over here just nodding my head off because I could not agree with more with you both. So great answers. I think we have time for one more question. I know we're like really short on time, but I am curious again. So I'm going to be nosy and ask this question. Hopefully it's helpful to our attendees, but what is something, Drew and Nicole, that you wish you had known that nobody told you about before you went into your gap year or before you went into your gap time? That's my question for you to close out this webinar.
That's a really big final question. There's a lot of things that I wish I would have known. As somebody who did hop into a gap year very last minute, I think it kind of took me a little bit to understand that the sky is the limit. I think I sort of went through the first couple months still in this mentality of like, I'm in school, I have to do these things. And I don't really think that I understood that I really could start, searching for what it is that I wanted to do, that I could sort of reinvent the wheel, that I could sort of try out new things that I wasn't back home. And I think just overall, if there's like one thing that I could have done differently, it would have been to just do what I felt like in the moment and just sort of, I don't know, experiencing and slowing down. Because even though a gap year is just a year or however long you want to make it, like I said earlier, that sort of mentality, what you learn, what you take away, what you do on your gap time doesn't have to last for just that allotted amount of time.
Yeah, I think this is a big final question, Claire. You really stumped me and made me think about it. But I think that the most important thing, or the biggest thing I wish I would have known, was that the people that you meet during this time, I'd take pretty seriously. Like, the people I met during my year became some of my best friends, became resources for potential jobs. They have so much. When you're in a certain community, the local people that you meet have such a great impact on your time. So really taking advantage of talking to as many people as you can, and I don't know, just soaking up every experience, because it goes by quick. A year sounds like a long time, but it goes by really quick.
It is so true. I remember, I'm sorry, I just spit a little bit because I was like, yes, that's so true. When we were rounding out the semester with my students, I had 40 of them in Costa Rica, and they were all just like, man, they just echoed everything that you said, Drew and Nicole. They're like, I wish I had just done more. I wish I had experienced more. And it's just a crazy time. This is so not eloquent after you guys have both spoken, but I will, I guess, round that out with there's no right or wrong way to do gap time. Anything that you do will be the best because you are going to be the one doing it. So more than anything, we're really excited to support you through this journey, supporting you through it via our gap year fairs. Please do join one if you haven't already, or join another if you have already. We have an upcoming one on February 12th. And then join us for another crash course too. If you enjoyed tonight, which I hope you did, I sure did. This was one of my favorites yet. We have a whole lot of other crash courses coming up that you can choose from. So thank you both, Nicole and Drew. You guys, I got hats off to you. Thank you everybody for tuning in. And I think that will round out our night. All right, take care everybody. Bye.